just curious. There's a lot of crossover between Tim Spector's Zoe app and his and whether that's something you recommend people do to wear the glucose monitors, work out how they react to carbohydrates and proteins and oils. Because I think, and the messages are much the same in terms of gut biome and having multiple types of fibre and fruit and vegetable products.
Thank you. That's such a great question. There's been so much buzz about personalized nutrition and CGMs and everything. And I am a fan of definitely some of the recommendations that Tim Spector has made around kind of increasing plant foods and paying more attention to that. However, what I'm not a fan of is that obviously the Zoe product is extremely expensive. I think it's minimum £250, if not more. But this is, to me, as a nutritionist, I want to make nutrition accessible and available to all. And selling a product that is that expensive automatically means you're going to reach the 1% and confuse people further about what a healthy diet is. We know that a tiny percentage of the UK population is actually following the NHS Eat Well guidelines. And if we all did that, I'd say all of you would have a lot less patience probably as well. But, we'd all just be a lot healthier. So I'm not a fan of it for that reason. I think that also, unless you have the skill set to be able to understand what a CGM is telling you, you might cut out otherwise healthy foods. You'd go for bacon, which is going to flatline your glucose, rather than a banana. The reason that the sugars are staying up after you have a banana is because you have underlying insulin resistance. It's not because the banana is ruining your health. And so it's very confusing. You see people online who are stressed that blueberries are spiking their glucose. That is terrifying to me as a nutritionist. So I think it's encouraging people towards a ketogenic diet, which is restrictive because they don't understand the data. Obviously, about 40% of the US population is living with prediabetes or diabetes. So there is value if you have got one of those conditions to use a CGM, but working alongside a qualified health professional. I also had lots of GP friends tell me they're so frustrated with people coming to them and saying they've got diabetes because their sugars went up after having a bowl of porridge, which is obviously wasting health professionals' time. And it's, again, we're about 10 to 20 years away from fully being able to personalize nutrition. So I'd say for now, it's not something I'd recommend. I think we know enough to know what a healthy diet is. It's a healthy, plant-rich, Mediterranean-style way of eating. Thank you.
I was quite interested in, you said that low-carb diets promote cortisol dysregulation. I just wondered if you could expand on that a little bit.
I can share the study about that. I think it was a 12-week study which showed that. But we know that low-carbohydrate diets, it just baffles me that people are still recommending them for PCOS. I think it's seen as kind of as an easy fix, like just cut out all carbs. I obviously do not recommend, there's a big difference between a jelly bean and a black bean. First, we need to get that clear. So when I say eating carbohydrates, I'm talking about healthy, whole sources of carbohydrates, whether it's barley, bananas, sweet potatoes, obviously more unrefined ones which have more fiber, more B vitamins, more inositol, all of those benefits. Whereas a ketogenic diet is restrictive. It has been shown to impact every single aspect of those PCOS biomarkers that are dysregulated, whether it's the LDL cholesterol, increased inflammatory markers. So that's why I'm not a fan. There are obviously many ways to lose weight, and I think there are healthier ways of having a lower carbohydrate diet. And little shifts that I recommend to my clients is if they're struggling, then to eat more legumes, for example. So maybe tofu, lots of vegetables. If they find that suits them, that's great. But we know that when we know that PCOS is not just a condition that's just about reproduction, it's got a long-term risk profile, then I can't recommend that. But yeah, I'll share the study with you on that. But yeah, it has been found to further dysregulate cortisol metabolism. And yeah, cortisol does tend to be higher in people with PCOS as well, although we don't recommend routinely testing for it.
I think it'd be really helpful because I'm often telling people how not all carbs are created equally and how
Absolutely.
It's so important having this conversation. And actually, if I could provide some evidence base, I think it'd be very useful just to try and compel.
There's a lot of evidence in that. I go into low carb
around it. So.
Oh, so true, so true. But yeah, definitely, we want to be having those healthy sources. I'll try and answer these really quickly.
So should we take one more question? Should we? And then we can take more questions in the panel session later.
You mentioned oral pills, but how about IUDs, for example?
So I don't really want to answer the medical questions because I do think as a nutritionist, and lifestyle professional, that's kind of I want to stay in my lane on that. Someone like my mother talks a lot about the Mirena IUD and there's lots of different considerations when you're looking at contraceptive. There are some women that I know would struggle with that kind of progesterone only sort of things and getting more acne and things like that. But I don't really want to answer that because I'm not a medical doctor. I think there was one question there. Maybe we've got time just to quickly answer it. Yeah.
Hi. There's lots of other discussions around intermittent fasting. Have you seen, or what's your experience, or what's the evidence around that and treating PCOS?
There's not that much evidence. There are a few studies showing promise, but as I mentioned, I'd much rather focus on that time-restricted eating. I do think having a break to rest and digest overnight is important. If you're grazing at 10 p.m. at night and going to bed, that has been shown to affect sleep quality. But the whole a lot of typical intermittent fasting is missing breakfast. And what happens then is that you enter the house after work, you are ravenous, and you end up eating everything in the cupboard. And I think everyone's been there, but it does increase I've even seen that even in my own clients, that increased risk of binge eating. So I'm not a fan of that. I think everyone is really different. So I would always look at the individual, and clearly it does work for some people, but because there is that increased risk of disordered eating, it can be a bit challenging in PCOS, but we haven't had many large-scale studies on that in PCOS, and in fact, intermittent fasting is something that's massively under-researched in women. I'd recommend looking at the work of Dr. Stacey Sims, who talks about how a lot of the research on intermittent fasting has been done on rats or men, and even the rats have been male rats. So, yeah, that's something I'd say, but we do go into it in a bit more detail in the book. But circadian rhythm eating is something that there's more evidence on for PCOS. Thank you.
Brilliant. I think we'll leave it there for now.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
Can you tell us about L-chiro-mayo inositol supplements' role, if any, in PCOS?
Yeah, I think that's D-chiro.
Okay, D.
Yeah, D-chiro. So in terms of PCOS, as I mentioned, there's a number of different supplements, and inositol has shown a lot of promise in restoring ovulation and helping for women with PCOS who are trying to conceive in particular. So it is naturally occurring in foods like whole grains, beans, legumes, fruits. So those are rich sources of inositol. But in terms of the supplement, the most famous one is sort of ionofolic acid. There is some evidence that it might be worth looking for a supplement, an inositol supplement with a ratio of 40:1 D-chiro-inositol to myo-inositol. So that's a ratio to look for, but I don't like recommending any one supplement, but that's a ratio 40:1 that's worth looking at. But I go into more detail about it in the book.
Brilliant. So get the book. Next question. So we've got, does the popularity with cooking with air fryers increase UPF consumptions and therefore conditions like PCOS? So maybe Rohini, another one.
Yeah, such a great question about air fryers. Air fryers have been I saw a lot of discounted air fryers in Black Friday and things. What really, with air fryers, as with any high temperature cooking, it will increase the amount of AGEs in the food. So if you've got PCOS, yes, it makes more sense to have more lower temperature cooking methods, but I don't think there's a reason to just completely steer away from air fryers. If it helps you to eat some healthier foods, whether it's certain vegetables or tofu, a lot of people don't know how to cook tofu, but if you put it in the air fryer and you marinate it, it tastes really good. So it's about really looking back at what is your actual diet. Sure, I don't use air fryers all of the time, but once in a while it's absolutely fine. Some of them do have a Teflon coating and might have certain things that aren't as great. And there's talk a lot on podcasts and the book, everything about endocrine disruptors. Women with PCOS are more sensitive to endocrine disruptors, including things like plastic water bottles. Shop receipts contain bisphenol A, so I advise people to wash their hands after touching those. But you can't live a perfectly toxin-free life. I live in central London. There's high rates of air pollution. There's toxins all over, but it's simple things like maybe avoiding a lot of fragrance products, other things that Dr. Kasrai already said are also good for the vagina and for your general health. But yeah, women with PCOS should be conscious of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, the studies are just absolutely not there to show that the Zoe app can help with weight loss of that level. I think they even have a study on that yet. It's still really tiny, and as mentioned, there's just not enough data for personalized nutrition. If you were to buy a CGM privately, a continuous glucose monitor like a Freestyle Libre or Dexcom, it's £50 for 2 weeks. So that is really unsustainable. That's £100 per month. So you're spending over £1,000 for a year, and that's basically indicating that you even understand how to use the data. The most important thing to mention, there is absolutely no study to currently indicate that a CGM will help someone make better food choices if they are a non-diabetic. There is just absolutely nothing. And actually, there's a shortage of CGMs in the USA for people with actual diabetes as a result of this craze. So I'm not a fan.
I think that's really helpful as well, because I think sometimes even from a doctor's point of view, you can get taken in with the marketing and things like this. So actually to know that there's no evidence around that and it doesn't actually help people lose weight, it's
I
that's a
think
big
interestingly,
thing.
there's a bit of evidence, you might know more, about keeping food diaries, so knowing what you're eating. And some of the people who've used CGMs have said to me, but that's the bit that they've found useful, because that's part of the whole program.
Yeah, I think bringing more awareness is fantastic.
So
So you can do that with MyFitnessPal or Chronometer, although
exactly.
obviously dieting is a risk factor for developing eating disorders as well. I think following the guidelines around the NHS Eat Well guide and focus on what you can add into the diet rather than just what you're cutting out. That's a big focus of mine as a nutritionist. So adding in more fruits, vegetables. Maybe if you only eat one portion, just start adding another one. Could you have a piece of fruit after lunch, or could you add a handful of spinach into your pasta sauce? There's lots of different tips like that, but I think that they are much more important than whether your gut microbiome will tell you that you really suit metabolizing wholemeal bread over pasta. It's just not that relevant or helpful.
Excellent, thank you. This one is it's almost like a longer statement, but it'd be useful to get your thoughts. So, to help improve immunity, why only use minuscule amounts of vitamin D? There is no evidence of vitamin D toxicity with supplements below 30,000 a day. A young person, whole body sunbathing in midday summer in sunshine in bright blue days makes 20,000 units of vitamin D in 20 minutes. Prof. Anthony Fauci takes 6,000 units of vitamin D a day. Vitamin D is not a vitamin, but a pro-hormone of the immune system regulating hormone, activated D3. So someone who's obviously very keen on vitamin D and vitamin D supplementation. What are your thoughts on that? So are we taking enough?
There's some really good points there, but there is an upper limit, which is 4,000 international units a day, and higher levels, like toxicity has been noted at higher levels and doses. So it is important to flag that, and we want to avoid people having to take injections and having all the issues relating to low vitamin D. There was obviously so much buzz around it, around the kind of COVID period and things, but I wouldn't recommend someone goes against the guidelines and starts self-prescribing massive doses of it. We know that just keeping your levels at that optimal level. I do, for example, take between 2,000 and 4,000 international units a day because I have PCOS, I've got darker skin, I'm South Asian, we're living in the northern latitudes where we don't get much sunlight, and so the advice is definitely, I wouldn't want to exceed that, but obviously you can do a blood test. I don't think that we recommend everyone does routine testing at their GPs, but if you've got a lot of the symptoms and you're low, that's something that could be considered. But yeah, I think everyone should be supplementing at this time of year. The government recommendation, by the way, is 10 micrograms per day, which is probably too low for certain groups of people.
Yeah, it seems low, doesn't it?
Yeah.